So today we are going to look at the part two of the book two of the Buddhism. So last time we saw how the Buddha has defined two kinds of convergence, and this whole part, the whole book two, is devoted to the campaign for conversion. And I think that's very interesting that Baba Ambedkar devoted the entire book two for the campaign of conversion, as to how the Buddha converted people he met into his philosophy or his Dhamma. And I found it very interesting that it links up with the Buddha's, after the Buddha's enlightenment. And the question about what is the Dhamma, what is Sadhamma, what is Adhamma, they are going to be coming in the next course of our discussion. Okay, in the next book. So the Buddha, after enlightenment, thought, who should I teach, or to whom should I share my findings, my Dhamma? And he immediately recalled, as we can see, that he immediately recalled his previous teachers that we have talked about, that is Alara Kalama and Udaka Ramaputta. He immediately recalled his two teachers. And I find this interesting because, of course, you share something with the people who are very close to you. You know their psychology, you know their mindsets, you know from what background they are coming from. So you naturally want to share whatever you have discovered with the people with whom you have a close association. And that is a pattern that we are going to see as a campaign for conversion. So this is what is the first verse about the section 1, arrival at Sarnath. So Buddha left Bodh Gaya and he walked up to Sarnath, and this is what is the first verse about. Having decided to preach his doctrine, the Buddha asked himself, to whom shall I first teach the doctrine? The thought of Alara Kalama, whom the Buddha adored as the learned, wise, intelligent, and of little impurity. What if I teach him the doctrine? But he was told that Alara Kalama was dead. Now see, here is a difference of language, because in other versions of this particular thing, the Buddha discerned through his psychic power. The Buddha discerned through his psychic power as to, that Alara Kalama was dead. But here it is, Baba Ambedkar has written like this, but he was told that Alara Kalama was dead. Then thought he of preaching it to Udaka Ramaputta, but he too was dead. So we can see that two of his teachers were dead. Two of his teachers were dead, to whom he wanted to preach his Dhamma, to teach his Dhamma, share his findings. Then he thought of the 5 old companions of his who were with him at Niranjana when he was practicing austerities, and who had left him in anger on his abandonment of austerities. Very significant thing. But then Buddha remembered his 5 companions with whom he has practiced the severe practice of austerities. And upon seeing that the Buddha has taken the meal from Sujata, they deserted the Siddhartha Gautama, and they thought that the Gautama has now fallen. He has left the path of the truth. So Buddha immediately thought of these 5 Parivrajaka, and and in verse 4, they did much for me, attended me, and looked after me. What if I teach? What if I first teach the doctrine to them? Said he to himself. That's what the Buddha said to himself. He asked for their whereabouts, having learned that they were dwelling at Sarnath in the deer park of Isipatana. He left in search of them. The 5 seeing him coming. This is very, very poetic description as to what has happened there in Sarnath. The 5 seeing him coming decided among themselves not to welcome him. Said one of them, "This, friends, is the ascetic Gautama coming, who has abandoned austerities and has turned to life of abundance and luxury. He has committed a sin. We must not therefore greet him, nor rise in respect, nor take his bowl and robe. We will only set apart a seat for him. If he wishes, he may sit down." And they all agreed. So that is what the 5 of them decided. They decided not to welcome Gautama, the Buddha, and they decided that if he wants to stay with us, he is welcome to stay with us. But they were not going to welcome him. But when the Buddha approached, the 5 Parivrajakas were not able to abide by their decision. So greatly impressed were they by his personality that they all rose in their seats. One took his bowl, one took his robe, and one prepared a seat, and one brought water to wash his feet. See, such was the power of the Buddha that when you look at him, when you try to behold him, when you try to talk to him, he has that magnetic power of personality of having understood the truth. Just give. Sorry, there was. So it was really a great welcome to an unwelcome guest. So what happened when the Buddha was trying to approach these five parivrajak? They decided not to greet him, not to welcome him. But it happened so that when Buddha started coming near to them, they couldn't resist to welcome him. And then, as we have seen in the verse 7, that the five parivrajak couldn't restrain themselves. They had to welcome the Buddha. And the verse number 8, it was really a great welcome to an beautifully put. Thus, those who intended to come to pray. This is what exactly happened with the Buddha all his life. Even if you wanted to avoid, talking to him, even if you wanted to avoid not to listen to him, but you cannot but, talk to him. You cannot but listen to him. That was the power of the Buddha's personality. And Baba Saheb Ambedkar has gone into describing the personality of the Buddha in the Buddha and his Dhamma very beautifully. Now, see, it is generally said that the Buddha's first sermon was the Dhammachakra Pravartan Sutta. And there is now a lot of scholarship coming, which is saying that the lot of suttas are the compilation of small suttas here and there. So basically, there were previously the Dhamma was not so much codified like what we get today in the suttas, because the Buddha spoke spontaneously. He didn't have that thing in mind to codify his Dhamma straightforward. So he had this, what I can say, that he spontaneously spoke like one person speaks with another person. And therefore, because Buddha is like speaking to another person, most of his sermons are like dialogues. It's like, the questions that the people ask to him, and in response to the questions that the Buddha has answered. So there is a very lovely book called Questioning the Buddha, where the author has, talked about the different questions that the people have asked to the Buddha and how Buddha has replied to those questions. The Dhammachakra Pravartan Sutta, which is very important sutta in Buddhism because it gives a kind of a gist of the Buddha's teaching, is very remarkably important. But here in the Buddha and his Dhamma, Baba Saheb Ambedkar has, I would say, done a job where he has tried to simplify the first sermon of the Buddha so that it will be easy for us to grasp and understand it in its entirety. Baba Saheb Ambedkar has not given a title like Dhammachakra Pravartan Sutta. This section is called the Buddha's first sermon. So we can take it as Buddha's first sermon with a base of Dhammachakra Pravartan Sutta and the gloss, the understanding, the interpretation of Baba Saheb Ambedkar. Okay, so the Buddha's first sermon. After exchange of greetings, the five parivrajaka asked the Buddha whether he still believed in asceticism. The Buddha replied in the negative. Now see, the question and answer starts. Okay, now the parivrajaka started asking the Buddha questions as to whether he still believed in the path of self-mortification, because they were practicing the self-mortification together. So they asked the Buddha whether he still believed in that path. The Buddha said, no, I don't believe in the path of self-mortification, self-abnegation. I don't believe in that path. He said there were two extremes, a life of pleasure and a life of self-mortification. In Pali, it is called Kamesu Kam Suklukanu Yogo and Atta Kil Mathanu Yogo. Means a path, one extreme is the extremity of a life of sensual pleasures, and the other extremity is the life of self-mortification. One says, let's eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. The other says, kill all vasanas, desires, because they bring rebirth. He rejected both as unbecoming to man. This is codified in Pali text like Nadve ante pabajjitena sevitabba. Those who have gone forth should not hold on to these two extremities. Now we have to understand this middle path very carefully, because now we are entering into the teachings of the Buddha, the very first sermon of the Buddha. He was a believer in the Madhyam Marga, Majjhima Patipada. Madhyam Marga is Majjhim Patipada, the middle path, which is neither the path of pleasure nor the path of self-mortification. Now see, there is always a kind of, when we talk about the middle path, we think that this is one extremity, this is another extremity, and we take the average of it. And we say that we walk the middle of it. But that is not the case. You know what, how Baba Saheb Ambedkar has defined it? It is neither this extremity nor that extremity, which is neither the path of pleasure nor the path of self-mortification. Answer me this, he said to the Parivrajaka. Now the question and answer beginning. He's asking, answer me this, O Parivrajaka, so long as your self remains active and continues to lust after either worldly or heavenly pleasures, is not all mortification vain. He says that you are trying to self-mortify yourself, but at the same time, yourself remains active and continues to lust after either worldly or heavenly pleasures. So if you do that, because they were all practicing the self-mortification, so he's questioning them. He's asking the five Parivrajaka that, you know, even if you are involved in the self-mortification, your mind hankers, goes after the worldly and heavenly pleasures. And they all answered, it is as thou sayest. As you said, Buddha, it is true. How can you be free from self by leading a wretched life of self-mortification if you do not thereby succeed in quenching the fires of lust? And they replied, it is as thou sayest. So because these five Parivrajaka are involved in the self-mortification, the Buddha is asking them that if your fires of desire are not quenched, what is the use of the life of self-mortification? Only when the self in A has been conquered that you are free from lust. See, as I was telling you that, you know, you can pick up a line from the Buddha and his Dhamma, think about it very deeply and try to find out a lot of meaning and a lot of understanding in the Buddha's teaching. Such is this sentence. Only when the self in A has been conquered that A are free from lust. See, if you want to conquer, if you want to be free from the lust, the most important thing for you is to conquer yourself. Without conquering yourself, you cannot be free from lust. Okay, so I think this sentence we have to underline, we have to think about it, because most of the times we want to destroy the lust without conquering ourself. And conquering self means conquering one's mind. You know that in the Pali there is a gatha in Dhammapad. There is a gatha which says that if you conquer a lot of enemies in the war, but if you do not conquer yourself, that means you are not victorious. So victory over the self is so important that is the path to the quenching the destruction of the lust. You will not then not desire worldly pleasures, and the satisfaction of your natural wants will not defile ye. Let ye eat and drink according to the needs of your body. This verse number 7, let you eat and drink according to the needs of your body. I think this verse number 7 is very important, that only when the self in A has been conquered that you are free from lust, you will then not desire worldly pleasures, and the satisfaction of your natural wants will not defile ye. Let ye eat and drink according to the needs of your body. Now the verse number 8. Now, so far, the Buddha was talking about the path of self-mortification. Now he's talking about the other end of the life that we all try to live. Sensuality of all kinds is enervating. The sensual man is a slave of his passion. All pleasure seeking is degrading and vulgar. But I say unto you that to satisfy the needs of life is not an evil. See, to satisfy the needs of life is not an evil. To keep the body in good health is a duty, or otherwise you shall not be able to keep your mind strong and clear, and have the lamp of wisdom burning. So to the five parivrajaka who are very devoted to the self-mortification, trying to mortify their bodies, to them the Buddha is addressing very beautifully, and he's also telling them that the sensuality of all kinds is enervating. The sensual man is a slave of his passion. All pleasure seeking is degrading and vulgar. But I say unto you that to satisfy the needs of life is not an evil. To satisfy the need of your body in terms of food, in terms of drinking water, or in terms of having the minimum clothes that you need to survive in order to have a shelter, is not an evil. Okay, to keep the body in good health is a duty, because when you self-mortify your body becomes weak. So what the Buddha is telling the five parivrajaka, that they should keep the body in good shape, or otherwise you shall not be able to keep your mind strong. So if you have a unhealthy body, if you have a sick body, then ultimately it becomes difficult for one to keep the health of the mind in a proper shape. Know eva parivrajaka, that there are these two extremities which man ought not to follow: the habitual indulgence on the one hand of those things whose attraction depends upon the passions, and especially sensuality, a low and pagan way of seeking satisfaction, unworthy, unprofitable, and the habitual practice thereof, and on the other hand of asceticism or self-mortification, which is painful, unworthy, and unprofitable. So you see, the Buddha has taught, or is telling the parivrajak about these two paths, these two extremities that the I would say the five parivrajaka should not treat or should not follow. They should rather follow the middle path. Now, what is this middle path? Verse number 10. There is a middle path which avoids both these extremes. Know that this is the path which I preach. So if the question is asked as to what path the Buddha preaches, it's the middle path. Majjhima Patipada. In Pali, it is called Majjhima Patipada. The verse number 11. The five parivrajakaas listened to him with attention, not knowing what to say in reply to the Buddha's middle path. They asked him what he was doing after they had left him. Then the Buddha told them how he left for Gaya, how he sat in contemplation under the banyan tree, and how after 4 weeks of contemplation, he obtained enlightenment, as a result of which he was able to discover a new path of life. On hearing this, the parivrajakaas became extremely impatient to know what the path was and requested the Buddha to expound it to them. Okay, now they become interested. That is how the question and answer takes place. In response to the questions that were asked to the Buddha is responding, and in that response, Buddha is igniting something in the minds of the listeners. He's asking them to think more. The Buddha's teaching is all about letting people to think more than they are capable of. Bringing something out of them which generally they won't be able to bring it out. I think that's the genius of the Buddha. You look at all the dialogues of the Buddha with different people, and you will see this genius of communication in the Buddha. He will prick your mind. He will prick your conscience in such a way that you will not but ask him the questions in a way that that will satisfy your own sort of inquiry into the truth. One of the examples of this very fascinating dialogues is the Milinda Prashna, where there's this dialogue between the Nagsen and the Bhikshu Nagsen and Milinda. It goes into the question and answer, and Nagsena probes deeper and deeper into the mind of Milinda, and Milinda responds to this deepening of inquiry between these two great people. Similarly, now the interest of the parivrajak is awakened. See, in any path of inquiry, it's very important to awaken the interest in the object, in the subject that we want to study. The more interested we become in something, the more sort of comprehension we reach. So this idea of having an interest in something, now this interest is awakened in the five parivrajakaas. Now they are interested. They want to know what is because the Buddha is talking their language. He's telling them that the self mortification that they are involved in is useless, because it doesn't end. the lust unless they conquer their own self. So now the practice has to be looked at from the point of view of how you conquer your own self. He is saying that, you have to, keep up your body well so that your mind is well. And he's saying that the healthy body is required for the healthy mind. So after having reached to this point, the Parivrajaks are extremely impatient to know what the path was and requested the Buddha to expound it to them. The Buddha agreed. He began by saying that his path, which is his Dhamma, had nothing to do with God and soul. See, all religions, as we have seen in the previous discussions, that all religions are about the God and soul and who were the human beings before they were born and what happens after the death. But here, I think this verse number 14 clarifies the uniqueness of the Buddhism. Very unique nature of Buddhism, Buddha's Dhamma. He began by saying that his path, which is Dhamma, had nothing to do with God and soul. His Dhamma had nothing to do with life after death. Nor has his Dhamma any concern with rituals and ceremonies. See, these three aspects, these three dimensions are so much an integral part of any religion. God and soul, an integral part of all the religions. Then life after death, that there will be a judgment day or heaven or hell after death, very much part of the religion. And the rituals and ceremonies, that if you have to conduct the rituals in this way or that way, there are ceremonies which are prescribed. I don't remember that the Buddha has prescribed any ceremony or ritual in the Pali Tripitaka. Those rituals and Tripitaka ceremonies have come afterwards. They are welcome because they develop the culture, but we see that they are not, rituals and ceremonies are not concerned with the Dhamma. The verse number 15, the center of his Dhamma is man. The human being is the center of his Dhamma, not the God and soul, not the life after death, not the rituals and ceremonies. The center of his Dhamma is man and relation of man to man in his life on earth. See, there are a lot of interesting things here, because our minds generally is taken by what are called the flamboyant questions. These questions are so flamboyant that they draw our attention out as to what is going to happen after death. Where were we before we were born? Whether there is any external agency that controls the universe, so on and so forth. These are flamboyant questions. They don't deal with the problems of life, and they neither solve the problems of life. Therefore, this definitions of the is so important. This definition should bring us back to the purpose of life, the purpose of the Dhamma itself. So the verse number 15, the center of his Dhamma is man and the relation of man to man in his life on earth. That time there was not these languages were all male, oriented patriarchal languages. So you can in today's terms, you can read it at the center of his Dhamma is human being and the relation of human being to human being in his life on earth. This he said was his first postulate. That was the first postulate of his Dhamma. His second postulate was that men are living in sorrow, in misery and poverty. See, Babasaheb Ambedkar would have been satisfied in saying that the men are living in dukkha. As I told you that, Babasaheb Ambedkar has increased the bandwidth of the term dukkha, because in the initial days of the formation of Buddha Dhamma, it's like very psychological oriented, like, non-satisfaction of the desire is the dukkha. The Pancha Upadana Khanda itself is a dukkha, so on and so forth. But the Buddha has also talked about, the social dukkha. The Buddha has also talked about the misery, the sorrow, the poverty. And the Buddha has also talked about what we can say, as Babasaheb Ambedkar said, samajik dukkha or social dukkha. That's like, and Buddha has criticized the sources of the social dukkha so much. We can see so many examples in the Pali text. So the second postulate was that men are living in sorrow, soka. In Pali we can say soka. in misery and poverty. The world is full of suffering, and that how to remove this suffering from the world is the only purpose of Dhamma. Nothing else is Dhamma. See, the purpose of the Dhamma now is made clear that the purpose of the Dhamma, the only purpose of the Dhamma is to remove this suffering from the world. The recognition of the existence of suffering and to show the way to remove suffering is the foundation and basis of his Dhamma. Dukkha and Dukkha Nirodha. These are the two goals of the Buddha, to explain what is dukkha and to develop the path to remove that suffering. See, if we read the traditional Dhammachakra Pravartana Sutta, it's not different from that, because the dukkha has to be understood. Before we end the dukkha, before we try to find a path to end the dukkha, it's very important for anybody to understand what is the dukkha. So the Four Noble Truths are not just like Four Noble Truths: Dukkha, Dukkha Samudaya, Dukkha Nirodha, and Dukkha Nirodha Gamini Patipada. This is the fourfold, Four Noble Truths. So the first Noble Truth says that we have to understand the Dukkha. There are three aspects of every Noble Truth. So there is a Dukkha. The Dukkha has to be understood, and the Dukkha has been understood. So only when we understand the Dukkha, we can really walk on the path to end the dukkha, which is called the Majjhim Patipada, Dukkha Nirodha Gamini Patipada. So Dukkha Nirodha Gamini Patipada is nothing but Majjhima Patipada. Majjhim Patipada is nothing but the Dhamma. Okay, this is a very simple explanation. So this is a very simple equation as to what is the Dhamma. This can be the only foundation and justification for Dhamma. A religion which fails to recognize this is no religion at all. So any religion which is centered on God and soul, which is centered on life after death, which is centered on rituals and ceremonies, according to the Buddha, they don't even qualify to be religion. The purpose of the religion is to end the dukkha. Verily, Parivajakas, whatsoever recluses or Brahmins, preachers of religion, understand not as it really is, that the misery in the world and the escape therefrom is the main problem of the Dhamma. Such recluses and Brahmins, in my opinion, are not to be regarded as recluses and Brahmins. Samana Brahmana. Those Samana Brahmana who teach other doctrines than this, they cannot be regarded as the Samana and Brahmana. Nor have those worthies come to know fully of themselves what in this very life is the real meaning of the Dhamma. This is the real meaning of the Dhamma: to end the suffering in the world. The Parivrajaka then asked him, if the foundation of your Dhamma is the recognition of the existence of suffering and the removal of suffering, tell us, how does your Dhamma remove suffering? Okay, now this is interesting. Now they are asking, they are probing further. The five Parivrajaka are probing the Buddha further. They are asking, if this is the real meaning of your Dhamma, then please tell us what is the path. How does your Dhamma remove suffering? The Buddha then told them that according to his Dhamma, if every person followed, one, the path of purity, two, the path of righteousness, and three, the path of virtue, it would bring about the end of all suffering. And he added that he had discovered such a Dhamma. Now see, this threefold division of the Buddha's teachings, and we will come with many divisions like that. That one of the divisions that I was referring to is about what is Dhamma, what is Adhamma, what is Sadhamma. Then there is traditional, division of the Dhamma into Seal, Samadhi, and Prajna. Okay, so here Baba Ambedkar is talking about the path of purity, the path of righteousness, and the path of virtue. Translated this into the Buddhist language, it is Panchashil, Shil. Then path of righteousness is Noble Eightfold Path, Arya Ashtangik Marga. And the path of virtue is nothing but the 10 paramitas. Now see, when we look at this 22 vows, it's like a condensed version of the Baba Sahib Ambedkar vision. If you ever want to have a brief 2 minutes take of Baba Sahib Ambedkar on Buddhism, you go back to the 22 vows and read it through and through. So when you read it through and through, you get all the pointers, all the gist of Baba Sahib Ambedkar's presentation and interpretation of the Dhamma. And that's why the 22 vows are so important for us, because there indeed Baba Sahib Ambedkar talks about what is the Dhamma. He talks about Paramitas, he talks about Ashtangik Marga, and he talks about Shila there. So this is the path to end the suffering. And today we are going to look at we are going to look at the first sermons, the path of purity. And because this section is so important, I'm going to read through it and going to gloss over some of the things that I find interesting. And then after this, we can all think about it. The Buddha's first sermon, the path of purity. Okay. 1. The Parivrajaka then asked the Buddha to explain to them his Dhamma, and the Buddha was pleased to do so. Buddha is always happy to share his Dhamma. I think that's the beauty of it, that the Dhamma is so beautiful that when you want to share it with others, you automatically become happy. That is the beauty of Dhamma. When you share, when you talk about the Bodhisattva, when you talk about the Buddha, if you have a faith, that has a tremendous power to gladden your mind. That has a tremendous power to brighten your day. So the Buddha is very pleased to tell. The Buddha is very pleased to teach. He is always eager to teach. We know that the Buddha, even at the deathbed, when Buddha was about to, attend Parinibbana, he didn't leave that opportunity to teach the Dhamma to Subhadra. So, he was very pleased. And the verse number 2 says, and the Buddha was pleased to do so. He addressed them first on the path of purity. He said, the path of purity, he told the Parivrajak, teaches that a person who wishes to be good must recognize some principles as principles of life. See, we have to have some principles in our life. Otherwise, our life, the difference between our lives and that of animals' life, there will not be any difference. And I think this is a very profound statement that everybody should have the principles of life. We know that in his own life, Baba Ambedkar had imbued a lot of principles, and he never went against the principles. And this is so important. If we have a definite set of principles in our life, then our life progresses to something which is very satisfactory. We should recognize some principles as principles of life. According to my path of purity, the principles of life recognized by it are. So what are the principles of life? Now see, the calling the Panchashil as the principle of life is, I think, very interesting. Because, when we recite them, we say Sikka Padam. They are like, training. It's very difficult to, practice them, but we can train our mind continuously in practicing them. And if you take them as principles, not as the fixed rules, then there is a lot of creative scope to practice these 5 precepts. So Baba Ambedkar didn't call them as such here precepts. He says they are the principles of life, and thus, the broadening the scope of the five precepts. They just don't become the rules for us, but they become the principles which can be applied in all walks of our lives. So see, this principle, not to injure or kill, this is the principle of life. It should be our principle in life, not to injure or kill, not to steal or appropriate to oneself anything which belongs to another. Adinandana Veramani. This is a principle. Then, this principle can be expanded to, the corruption in the government offices, that, it can be expanded if we take them as the principle. It's not just theft, anything that belongs to other, you cannot take it. Not to speak untruth. This is also a principle. Not to indulge in lust, not to indulge in too much of a sensuality, not to indulge in intoxicating drinks. This is so beautiful. Like if you take Panchashil just as rules or, some kind of commandments, then, we limit their scope. But if we take them as the principles of life, that, they are the governing principles of my life, they are the standards of my life. I'm going to, have something to look up to judge myself, to mirror myself. They are like the mirror, which has these 5 aspects. Not recognition of these principles, I say, is most essential. The recognition of these principles, I say, is most essential for every person. For every person, it's very important to recognize these 5 principles. For every man must have a standard by which to judge whatever he does. And these principles, according to my teachings, constitute the standard. See, every thing has to have some kind of standard. So every behavior that we have, it needs a standard to, judge. And that without having a standard in the life, our lives go here and there. There are everywhere people who are patit, fallen, but there are two classes of the patit: the patit who has a standard and a patit who has no standard. See, we all make mistakes. We are not the Buddha, but that's not the excuse that we keep on committing the mistakes. But we all do commit mistakes at one point of time, or at some part of our lifetime. We fall, and we are all patit. But Baba Ambedkar, puts very beautifully here that there are two kinds of patit. So a patit, one kind of a patit has a standard to judge whether they have fallen. Another kind of patit, they do not have a standard to judge whether they have fallen. Now, what happens? The patit who has no standard does not know that he has fallen. Consequently, he always remains fallen. On the other hand, a patit who has a standard tries to rise from his fallen state. Why? The answer is because he knows that he has fallen. I think this verse number 8 is remarkable from different aspects. I think it's very remarkable from different aspects for many number of reasons. One of the reasons being this verse is important is that it directly speaks to an individual. It directly speaks to us, as it were. Well, how does it speak to us? We are all patit. We are all fallen. But there are two kinds of patit. The patit who has no standard does not know that he has fallen. Consequently, he always remains fallen. On the other hand, a patit who has a standard tries to rise from his fallen state. Why? The answer is because he knows that he has fallen. Such is the significance of Panchashil. Such is the significance of having the principles in life, because those principles, they become the mirror of one's life, by which we can know whether we are fallen, or whether even if we are fallen, we can rise up, because we know that there is a standard that we have to aspire to. This is the difference between having a standard and having no standard for regulating a man's life. We need to regulate our life, because if we do not have the standard to regulate our life is definitely going to go haywire. It's definitely going to go through a lot of trouble. It's definitely going to go through a lot of suffering. It's definitely going to cause a lot of harm to the world. So that's why, to regulate the life. So we need the principle of life to regulate our life. What matters is not so much the fall of the man, but the absence of any standard. See, I think that's the beauty of it. See, fall of a man is going to happen. But if there is in the society a standard, then we can know that, people are fallen or not fallen. We know that we have fallen. We know that we need to rise up. And, the Dhamma helps us to rise up from any fallen state, because it has got something to aspire for. You may ask a Parivrajaka, why are these principles worthy of recognition as a standard of life? The answer to this question you will find for yourselves if you ask, are these principles good for the individual? Are these principles good for me? The answer is two questions we have to ask. And Baba Sahib Ambedkar always asked two questions. And even the Buddha asked two questions, whether it's beneficial for you and beneficial for others. Whether it's Bahujan Hitaya, Bahujan Sukhaya. Similarly, the answer to this question you will find for yourself if you ask, are these principles good for the individual? Also, if you ask, do they promote social good? Are they good for the individual? Do they promote social good? If your answer to these questions are in the affirmative, then it follows that the principles of my path of purity are worthy of recognition as forming a true standard of life. See, how you frame the question is also important in the Buddha's teachings, and the Buddha is continuously teaching through this, raising more questions, and he's asking the listener to answer for themselves as to how would they answer those questions. So after having discussed these principles of life, the standards of life with the 5 Parivrajaka, and describing them in details, talking about the fallen man, the patit, two kinds of patit. One patit who knows that they are fallen, and the other patit who never knows that they are fallen, and they go on falling deeper into deeper troubles. So the Buddha asked the question, are these principles good for the individual? Also, if you ask, do they promote social good? I think good for the individual and promotion of the social good, I think they are the twin pillars of, of aspiration in Buddhism, whether it's good for the individual and whether it's good for the society. If your answer to this question are in the affirmative, then it follows that the principle of my path of purity are worthy of recognition as forming a true standard of life. See, the beauty of the Buddha and his Dhamma is to understand the Buddha's teachings from many directions, from many vantage points, from many 360 degrees. So I think the description of the Shila, the 5 precepts, as the path of purity is so beautiful, and raising the 5 precepts at the level of what we can say to the principles of life. These are the principles of life, standards of life to regulate one's life. Why is that? Why should we practice the path of purity? Because they are good for the individual, and they are good. They promote the social good. So we can understand the significance of the Panchashil, and we can understand the scope of Panchashil when you look at them as the principles of life, when you look at them as the standards of life, not just the set of rules, not just the set of commandments, but as the principles of life. I think that there lies the genius of Babasaheb Ambedkar in communicating to us the sense of Buddha's Dhamma to the modern people, so that they can apply it, look at it, in their context, without changing the pith and the substance of the Dhamma. It is the Buddha Dhamma, the 5 precepts are the Buddha Dhamma, but as Babasaheb Ambedkar said, understanding and interpreting for today's world is so important, and that is what exactly is being done in the Buddhism. So I think this path of purity as Shila, as 5 precepts, as the principles of life, as the standard of life for regulating one's life, so that it will promote the good of an individual, it will also promote the social good, is, I think, a very tight and clear and neat exposition of 5 precepts that we have seen in the Buddha and Dhamma. With this, I will open up today for more discussion and comments from you all.
In Buddha's first sermon, point number 3.
Point number?
Point number 3. 3.
Okay.
3.
Okay.
For tomorrow, the other says, kill all vasanas desire because they bring rebirth. He rejected both as unbecoming to man.
Unbecoming to man, yeah.
So this sentence carries deep meaning.
Please elaborate, madam.
Yeah. So it says that means desire bring rebirth. This means that at each fraction of a second, there is rising and passing away of the particles, subatomic particles of the body, and there is change of this nam and pa. Means if the desires are not fulfilled, then the same desire passes into the next moment, and then again there is change of body as well as consciousness, nam and rupa. This is rebirth in present life. So this is being is becoming. So this theory he rejected both as uncoming to man. So he accepted being is becoming.
Yes, right.
And that's the rebirth of the next life.
Your voice is choking, Thai.
So there is change. Means being is beginning, means arising and passing away of nama and rupa to next moment. This is called rebirth.
Okay.
Carrying means passing away same feeling. If there is extreme greed, and if you don't stop that greed, then same feeling go to next moment. This is what of consciousness, and simultaneously there is rebirth of Nam.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Nam and
Yes. I think, Tai, your point is very valid, and there is habitual indulgence. If you look at this word in the verse number 9, and also it comes again, habitual practice. I think this habitual indulgence, what it does, if you have this habitual indulgence, then it creates an habitual habit energy in us, and it leads to the same behavior again and again. Ponobhavika.
yeah,
So punarbhav in Buddhism, the Buddha has talked about punarbhav, means
yeah,
same thing happening again and again and again and again.
yeah,
And that is what,
yeah.
and that is what is the second noble truth is all about. Yayang pranna pono bhavika nandi raga sahagata tatra tatra bindini. That's a traditional definition of the four, the second noble truth, that the dukkha comes because of the habituated indulgence into something. So if you are habitually indulged into something, there is no possibilities of any newness. Okay. There is no possibilities of going forth. There is no possibilities of, of further development. If you are practicing the same habitual indulgence into lust or into sensuality. Now, some kind of the habits, like the good habits, always leads us to the production of I think the goodness in the world, or social good. And as you said about this vasanas, the vasanas is a very, I would say, very powerful word in Buddhism, particularly in the philosophy of Vasubandhu and Vasubandhu. It's very important word, vasana, that everything is colored by the sensuality. Okay, and it's very, and because it is colored by sensuality, this word goes on repeating the same patterns again and again and again. Okay, so
Word rebirth. People relate this rebirth to Punarjanma, previous life.
yes.
So this is totally wrong.
But we can
This
call it
rebirth is-
punarbhav. We can go on with the concept of punarbhava, punarbhavika. Like bhava means becoming again and again, becoming again and again. Yeah. Yeah. Pankaj bhai.
Sir, this one question is arising in the mind based on so many discussion till date, among various friends. This Panchashil, or not to kill, not to steal, not to speak untruth, indulge in lust, or not to take intoxicants. This is very common or teaching in other religions also. What separates Buddhism is a relation with man to man in this very life, and the inquiry or of his inquiry into the mind. This is what separation I see from this five. So, but still, can you put your expertise to explain these five percepts are same everywhere, but still how it differs in other religion and Buddhism?
See, in other religion, the integral part, the central part is the God and soul. The focus on life after death and rituals and ceremony. But while in Buddhism, the focus itself, the center itself is the relationship between two human beings. Now, what is the standard of a relationship of one person with another person? There comes the path of purity. The path of Shila. Now, what is the path of Shila? In one of the writings in the Prabuddha Bharat, Baba Ambedkar has said that because we don't want other to hurt us, we won't hurt them. Will anybody like if they are killed? If anybody anybody would like if they are cheated? If anybody would like that they are told lies? No. So actually, this path of purity is actually very interpersonal. The precepts are not personal. The practice emerges from a personal person, but at the end, it becomes interpersonal. You need two people to practice this. You see, so the relationship between man to man is governed, regulated by the 5 precepts.
Great.
Okay, so this is a regulator of the social relationship, as Baba Ambedkar said, that they promote the social good. You see what I'm trying to get it at?
Yes. Very much. It is connecting. Yes.
Yeah. So how do you regulate the social relationship? And most of the suffering in the world is because of not regulating this relationship between the human beings. Now take the example of a caste system. The very first precept, the very first principle of life is challenged. Right? So if you imagine a society where the first principle of life, that is not to hurt, not to kill anybody, is practiced, it will regulate a life. Now today, for example, the life in India is regulated by the principle of caste, right?
Yes.
So if you have a principle of caste as a regulator of life, it is going to create immense social suffering.
Yes, that is what happening. Yes.
Isn't it? It's going to create immense psychological suffering. But imagine a society which is regulated by the 5 precepts, because the 5 precepts are interpersonal, reciprocal in nature. You don't need 5 precepts if you are living alone in the jungle.
Yes.
Isn't it? But if the moment you come in relationship with other human beings, these principles of life comes to govern your relationship.
Yeah. So we can say in Buddhism, this Buddhism allows to maintain also, or it teaches how to practice in day-to-day life.
Exactly.
It maintains that methodology basically.
Exactly. And then if you follow 5 precepts, it doesn't mean that you will end up going into heaven.
that is very clear.
Isn't it? But you will create a more better society. The society will be, it will promote social good.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
True.
So there is a remarkable difference between the for example, 10 commandments, or whatever there are, the commandments given in religion and the 5 precepts. Isn't it?
Great.
Or these principles of regulations, regulating one's life in relationship with other life. I would say that it is the principles to connect one life with another life. So
that's very nice.
They are so basic to us as a human being, and because of that, a basis of our connection with other human beings, that the world, is benign. Isn't it? So how do you connect one life with another life? With the practice of precepts. If you don't practice the precepts or these principles of life, you disconnect with another life.
True.
For example, the caste is a disconnect between the lives.
Yes.
Isn't it? You are automatically disconnected from other life. You are automatically disconnected from other human being.
Yes.
If we practice communalism, if we practice excessive nationalism, we are disconnected from the other human beings. They are just like us.
True.
Isn't it? So underlying principle of the life is this, that as I am, so they are. So you don't bring in religion between your relationship between other human beings. You don't bring nationalism in relationship with other human, when you relate with other human beings. You don't bring gender when you try to relate with other human beings. But the basis of your relationship with other human beings are the principles of life, the 5 precepts.
Well said, sir. Well said. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, Subhash bhai.
Hello, Jevim to all of you. What Pankaj ji was asking, in that only what Mangesh sir has told already, that Buddhism is nothing but how a person should behave, or what should be the moral code of conduct between two. This is where religion comes, Buddhism comes. So having said that, and having endorsed fully what Mangesh has told, I want to further extend this one. Actually, if we compare other religion with Buddhism, in other religion, as Mangesh sir already told, that the central theme or central discussion in other religion is the God and heaven, life, next life. However, in Buddhism, it is not like that. Buddha has replaced God with moral values. And how to follow these moral values? Moral values, these are the 5 precepts. To qualify one as a Buddhist or Buddha's follower is 5 precepts. To my understanding, it goes like that. In other religion, believing in, say, Jesus, believing in Allah, believing some God, this, that qualifies to be a follower of that religion or this. In Buddhism, I think even if you do not worship Buddha, that's okay. But if you follow 5 precepts, you are Buddhist. Means this is my understanding. So this is the criteria. I think very 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 specific, measurable, and achievable. 5 precepts have been prescribed by Lord Buddha to common man. Although there are other more than 200 rules for bhikkhu and bhikkhunis, but for common man, these 5 precepts, which are very much reachable and practicable by a common man. So with this, thank you, Mangesh sir.
Well said, well said. Very good, Subhash.
Thank you so much, sir.
Alkata, there is a problem with your connection.
Okay, is it?
Right.
Is it
okay.
correct?
Yeah,
Is it
it's,
right?
okay. It's better now.
Yeah. Panchashil is considered as the standard of life. If a person says Shil, then he should be considered as a good man. If he doesn't follow Panchashil, then he should be considered as a bad man.
I think, Tai, this category of good and bad, because we are Buddhist, so this middle path means if we fix the human beings as good and bad, then what happens? There is no scope. We can say patit, or as Baba Saheb Ambedkar said, I think he was very meticulous in not to not to stereotype people into good or bad. He was saying that patit and not patit. You see, Tai, what I'm trying to get it at? Because when we say good and bad, then it creates a dichotomy in the community. So some people are good at this time, but maybe bad in the future. Some people are good now, maybe they turn the evil ones in the future. So what I think, Tai, I think we have to develop a new language now. We can say that because he has failed the Panchashil, or she has failed the Panchashil. So when we say that Mangesh has failed the Panchashil, then that means that he has fallen from the standard. So he has to upgrade his standard now to that level.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying? So then you give a scope for the people to improve.
Yeah, there is always scope.
Isn't it? But if you don't give the scope, if you say, oh, you are a bad person, you are a bad person, you are a bad person, what happens is that we fix them in that. That kind of a judgment is important for us for the certain period of time. But if we make them into an absolute term, that's what is happening in our society today. You castigate somebody as a bad or good or like that, then it creates. But you will say, okay, they are not following the 5 precepts. They have fallen from the 5 precepts. They have to upgrade their lives. They have to upgrade their standards. They are not up to the mark. You see what I'm saying, Tai? Hello?
Yes.
Isn't it? They are not up to the mark.
Yeah.
They are not promoting social good. They are not doing good to themselves. Isn't it? So I think we need to develop evolve this new Buddhist language in the society. I find this path of purity section very small but very powerful.
True.
Isn't it? Very small. It says that, okay, see, we are all fallen. There is nobody can say that they are like, in Hindi we say Dudh ka dhula or whatever. We all fail because we are not at the Buddha. But even if we are fallen, if we have a standard, we know that we have to rise up. We know that we have to make efforts. We know that we have to go forth. We know that, now it's the time to devote ourselves fully because we are patit.
Yeah, that means he must know that he is patit. Then only he will try to rise from that position.
Right. So we can tell others, okay, you are not up to the mark. I'm sorry, you are not up to the mark. You are not up to the mark as Baba Saheb Ambedkar has, given us, as Buddha has given us. Upgrade your life. Upgrade your life. Okay. Rise up.
Yeah, rise up.
Rise up. Rise up. Don't stay there. Come up. Anything else? If not, then I have a summary to make, because now we are entering into the teachings of the Buddha. And I think I find it very fascinating that Baba Saheb Ambedkar has come to one particular understanding from different vantage points. So as we go on, a lot of concepts will become clear to us, and we can I would say that unlock a lot of concepts. We can unwrap a lot of things, so that we begin to see the Buddhism in its whole entirely multidimensional point of views. So let's keep on striving, and let's keep on studying, and let's keep on reading, let's keep on discussing, let's keep on debating, so that we have more clarity, and the more clarity is better for us to practice anything. So with this, if there is nothing pressing on anybody's mind, we should finish for today. We should stop for today.